Hey listeners, welcome back to yet another enlightening episode of What the Puff podcast. This is your host Mrinal along with your co-host Nitesh.
Hello, listeners. Welcome to the fifth episode of What the Perf podcast.
Nitesh, how are you? How's the weather at your side of Bangalore?
I'm doing great, Mrinal. The weather is kind of sunny today after so many days.
Yeah, all along it was kind of gloomy. It's good that it's sunny today. So Nitesh, what's the topic for today?
Today, we are going to look on how to do performance testing. What are the tools that we can use, and what are the techniques or what are the steps that are involved in performance testing?
Great. So let's get right onto it. But before that, can you tell us about the news this week, Nitesh?
In this week's news, I have four items. In the first news, Google has announced their latest update to Wear OS. So basically, it is installed on their smartwatches and other wearable devices. They claim that it will be 20% faster than their current version. So they have come out with a significant improvement in their UIs as well.
Yeah, I think it is due sometime after 2 months, I think. I personally use a Wear OS watch, and I wouldn't say it's too slow, but yes, there is a lot of room for improvement. And compared to Apple Watch, it's way behind. So good that Google is bringing out this update.
In another news, Chrome on Android will start labeling websites that are loading quickly. So it is going to be available in the beta version of Chrome 85 for Android. And based on metrics from Core Web Vitals, this system is an initiative that is launched earlier this year. It helps site owners measure factors such as the loading times, responsiveness, and stability of content as it loads. It allows them to make improvements wherever needed. So this tool basically helps developer a lot.
So yeah, I came across this Web Vitals plugin. I think it is available for from Chrome Web Store. You can install this plugin and check how your page is behaving. You can get a lot of performance metrics. So yeah, I think they are going to use this to judge whether a site will load faster.
Yeah, so the website which will be loading faster, a fast badge will start appearing when you long press on a link.
Hmm.
So it brings up which that link brings up the context menu, and that contains copying and sharing and other features. So along with that, it will also show whether the website is fast or not.
Yeah, another reason to make your websites faster.
Yeah. So basically, it will help those who are using slow or unreliable network connections.
Yeah, correct.
So in earlier episodes, we had mentioned regarding SpaceX Starlink's satellite, right?
Yes.
In that, we have noticed that some Reddit user has posted few tests that were done on Ookla internet speed test. So
Hmm.
their broadband speed range has come out between 11 to 60 Mbps, and their latency is below 100 milliseconds,
Wow.
lowest being 31 milliseconds. So Elon Musk had stated earlier that their target latency is going to be 20 millisecond.
Wow.
Right now, average broadband speed in US is 92 Mbps. So they are not that far behind.
Yes, it was said in that article earlier that they are going to be operational in parts of US and Canada, right, Nitish?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think these numbers are from those areas.
So in the last news, Sentry.io, which is a error monitoring platform mainly for JavaScript, they recently introduced performance measurements to its platform. That's a great news.
Yeah, exactly.
This platform, it gives you a deeper visibility into API calls and database queries that are critical for business perspective.
Wow.
And this requires very minimal addition to your code. So basically, it's 5 to 6 lines of addition that you have to do in your code to get this feature enabled.
Yeah, basically they can't complain about too many code changes to measure performance going forward. Is that right, Nitish?
Right, Mrunal. It gives transactions by duration time, related code errors, and impact to the customer. So this extends alerting capabilities also to include transactions.
Great.
I hope this feature is going to be very good for developers.
Yeah, and I hope they use it a lot. Thank you for bringing us up to speed on news, Nitesh.
My pleasure.
So let's get started with today's topic.
Yeah, today we are discussing on how to do performance testing. So as mentioned in previous episode, what is performance testing? It is just a system under test. We are putting load on a system and analyzing how it behaves under load. So how to do that? How to identify the load, what tools you want to use, where should we test it, and what and how to analyze. This is what we are discussing in today's episode, how to do performance testing.
Yeah, right off the bat, performance testing is not functional testing. You can't plan to perform a load test in the same way as functional testing. So let's look at some of the steps that are involved in performance testing.
So generally, there are some specific steps that are followed across the industry. In first step, we identify the test environment. What do we mean by that? We mean that your performance testing environment should be same as production environment, or like it should be a replica environment, or it should be a scaled down version of that environment.
Yeah, some people or some organizations tend to have the same environment in terms of sizing as production environment, and some organizations even test directly on production environment. Like in the episode with Ganesh, he mentioned that they used to run performance tests directly on the production environment. There is a lot of things you need to work out to understand where you want to run your test, whether you want to have a separate environment, you want to share it with other lower environments. So it all depends on how your project is running.
Right. So in many cases, functional testing shares environment with performance. So sometime they will be doing functional testing, and performance tests are scheduled in the evening or in the night in the same environment.
Yeah, that has some disadvantages in the sense you will have to have a separate set of test data for performance. You have to make sure you keep your test data separate than that of other forms of testing. Like, you don't want to consume all the data that somebody in the functional testing created it.
Right,
Uh,
definitely.
so, in what we have seen over the years, I mean, most people prefer to have a separate performance environment, although it may be a scaled down version of production. So, let's say if you have a 16 GB machine, just an example. If you have a 16 GB machine running in production, you will choose slightly scaled down. Some, let's say, 2 GB machine, but it's not always linearly scalable, but you have to make some arrangements so that you have a scaled down version of the production environment.
Right. So the second step is that what are the KPIs? KPIs is key performance indicators. What are KPIs and what are their acceptance values? This is basically the criteria on which your tests are going to be considered passed or failed.
Yeah. In many cases, performance testing is an afterthought. People start thinking about performance testing maybe to satisfy compliance requirement, or maybe to show that, yeah, we are doing performance testing. In those cases, this becomes really tough to get from the stakeholders. So it is a requirement that you have your KPIs. Before you start your performance testing endeavor, you should know what are your KPIs, what is the outcome that you're looking out of your performance tests, and you should define the metrics that you want to get out of it, and the acceptance values for those metrics. That is when you get a value out of performance testing.
Right. So in many companies which are doing this continuously over the years, they have created a process based on the market research as well as the usage of the products and applications. So in those cases, it is identified that how much volume will the production see in the coming days, and how much spike added. So both of these values are took together, and we define what are the acceptance values in our test cases. But
Mhm.
in the companies where it is newly established or they are starting the performance testing, it gets difficult to identify that what are the particular metrics and what should be their values. So in those cases, you have to majorly focus on these things first, because if you come back to if you go on and continue a process and then come back to these things, it is going to get difficult for you.
Exactly. And then the next step would be to plan your tests and design how you what all user journeys you want to run as part of your performance testing.
Right.
Planning involves what tools you want to use, how to set up that tool, how to identify user journeys. Nitesh, as you mentioned, if at all there is data about production usage, you can get that data to understand what are the most used pages or what are the APIs that are most used, which are very important or critical from the business point of view,
Right.
or which APIs or pages are very resource intensive. So based on that, we start identifying what user journeys to include as part of performance testing.
Right. So this is generally documented well ahead of time with all identified user journeys, with all identified your test scenarios. And here you also define that what type of tests, performance tests are needed to be done on the application or the product. So we have listed earlier that there are many types of performance tests, for example, load, endurance, stress, spike, and there are many more than that. So it
Yeah.
depends on your architecture, it depends on your applications usage, and it also depends on the business point of view.
Yes, exactly. So if it's an e-commerce, you might need a point load test,
Right.
and if you have a, let's say, banking application, you might want your operations to be running continuously, and you want to test it for endurance, right?
Correct.
So
Right.
these things have to be planned ahead.
Right. And in some cases where, let's say, you are running a batch job, there are many jobs that are to be run at the end of the day. So in that case, you
Yeah.
do a volume testing, you do a database testing.
Yes. You also need to think about what kind of tool you want to use. There are multiple tools available in the market for load testing. For example, Mercury Load Runner, Apache JMeter, Neotis NeoLoad. But you will have to think about how this tool will be compatible with your application. You need to run some POCs and check if this particular tool that you want to pick up is compatible with your application. The other criteria that you want to evaluate the tool on would be how many virtual users you want to run using the tool, and what is the kind of support offered by the tool. For example, JMeter is an open source tool. You won't find much support
Right.
apart from BlazeMeter articles or people answering questions on Stack Overflow.
Right.
You also need to consider how much of skill is available in the market for that particular tool. So if you take load runner, I would say 60 to 70% of the performance test engineers available in the market will know how load runner works. In the recent trends, we are seeing JMeter being used increasingly, but it all depends on how compatible the tool is with your application.
So the next step is you set up your test environment. So based on the
Mhm.
first point where you identified what is your test environment going to be, you start your steps towards that. You start setting it up. If it is production, you create a separate database of your own so that production database doesn't get hampered. If you're sharing your environment with functional team, it doesn't get hampered. You create your own database there. You create your own instance there. Or if it is a separate environment, you completely set up it from the scratch. In the previous case, you have also defined what is the architecture going to be in your application. So based on that, you identify that what components are going to be in your test environment. You set up all those components, including your major application resource.
Exactly. So you get to, I mean, that is what your test should do, right? Your
Right.
application, the pages that you hit or the API calls that you make, you need to be able to track the flow of those calls across these various infra components.
So you also need to set up your logging mechanism, your debugging mechanism at the same time.
Yeah, along with logging, we also should have monitoring across the environment in all of these infrastructure components that you just talked about, Nitish. So,
Right.
let's say your application is running wholly, fully on AWS, and you are using most of your infra components across AWS services. Then you have something called as CloudWatch. So you can go have some dashboard setup for each of these infra components, and you can monitor while you run your test. You should be able to check what is the utilization and any specific metrics related to that infra item or infra component.
Right. So Mrunal, Do you think the necessity of monitoring is more important before the test, setting it up before the test?
Yes, it gets really easy when you have monitoring data. Otherwise, you'll have to sift through a lot of logs. So you should have monitoring enabled in your testing environment as well as production environment. When you have it in performance environment, you catch bugs early so
Right.
that you have a issue free build sent to production.
Right.
In the next step, we create test scripts and implement the test plan.
Yeah. So in the test planning phase, we identified that what user journeys are going to be included in our test. So we are creating an automated script here for those steps. Let's say user journey is defined in such a manner that a user opens the website, logs into the website, then does his own transaction and then logs out. We all create test scripts for automating complete steps. And implementing test planning means that type of load test, endurance test, stress test we have identified in our test planning phase, we are going to implement that. That means we are creating a scenarios including all our scripts, and we are giving the configurations that how many number of users we are going to run the test with, what will be the duration of the tests, and we can also schedule using our test design that when are we going to run our tests. That all depends on the environment.
And the test tool that you have finalized.
Exactly. In the next step, we execute the tests that we have created test scripts for and generate test reports. These test reports can contain different matrices that we had earlier defined. For example, transaction per second, what should be the response time of all the scripts of all the flows that you have scripted. And you can also include the monitoring data in case there is some anomaly or in case it's just a requirement, compliance requirement in the reports.
So yeah, essentially executing tests means you have a bunch of scripts already created. You put all that together in your test tool, and you also have your test scenario design as we explained in the earlier step. So now that we have a test report from our test run, we have to analyze the test results. That involves looking into each of the transaction result, the monitoring data that we had, and if there are any issues, we need to debug those. Then, if at all it is required, we have to retest.
Right. So in this step, we basically analyze the test reports and combine that data with the monitoring reports that can be generated through different monitoring tools. So let's say you have faced some issue in your test. For example, your CPU of the application spiked. So how can you correlate that data with the report? What is the impact of that in your test execution? You need to identify the issue from these reports. This can
Exactly.
help you in debugging the issues. Once you debug those issues, you get the idea where the issue could be, what could be the bottleneck, and try to get that fixed and retest if that issue is really fixed or not, if that issue fixing has impacted some other point in the application or not. So this is a whole
Exactly.
cycle. This is a feedback loop kind of thing. Once you created the test scripts, you have tested them, you have found out some issues, then you get them fixed, you execute your test again, generate reports, analyze whether it is fixed or not. Until it gets fixed, you keep on doing this loop.
Exactly. And the most important thing during this whole process is to understand the flow of requests in your application. You need to really understand how your application works.
Right.
Uh, what are the components that interact when a request comes through? So that is
Right.
really important.
Yes, exactly. We have seen many performance engineer, performance testers not getting the idea of what the application is. They know very well how to do the performance test. They know how to create scripts and analyze the results. But when it comes to the application, they lack that knowledge.
Ritesh, that was a great discussion on how to perform performance testing. I hope our listeners will take away something valuable from this discussion. So that brings us to the last section of this episode. That means it's time for What the Crash.
Today in What the Crash, we have three items. The first one is regarding our beloved Indian automaker, Mahindra.
Hmm.
They announced the latest version of Thar in an online event, and its microsite was unavailable for a short period of time because users trying to get details about the models.
Yeah, I tried to check out the details about the two versions that they announced. The site was unavailable. It was showing that 502 bad gateway page from Cloudflare.
Right.
Sometimes it was throwing up a static page, and sometimes it was showing a bad gateway page. After about 2 3 hours, I was able to get the details from the actual site, so it worked out well for them later. But again, the same old disconnection between marketing and IT engineering teams.
In the second what the crash item, the website for booking new driving tests in England and Wales had crashed. They relaunched that website on Friday after the coronavirus lockdown, and users started booking their driving tests on that. Due to unprecedented demand, it crashed.
Unprecedented demand. Does that sound familiar, Nitish?
Yes, Mrunal.
So again, coronavirus wreaking havoc everywhere. I
Right.
think people were waiting to just give away their driving test so that they could get a driver's license, but coronavirus, cut short all their plans.
Right. And many users had already done their driving tests and got failed, or they had booked earlier, but because of the lockdown, they were not able to complete their driving test. In the third what the crash item, New Zealand Parliament's petition website crashes. So their restaurant association were running a petition to subsidize them for $27 million worth of meals. Due to coronavirus, they had faced many issues in their businesses and were running in losses. To compensate for that, they had started a petition, and due to high number of people signing their petition, the website got crashed. So basically, what the IT department of Parliament had reported is that website's secure certificate had been compromised, due to which it was inaccessible for 12 hours.
Oh, so there was some data loss as well, is what I read.
Yes, Mrinal.
Yeah, I think there was some mention about losing potential signatures for the petition.
Yeah. So they were estimating that they lost some 500 to 600 signatures. So that brings us to the end of the episode. I hope our listeners enjoyed this one, and thank you for tuning in.
Yes, thank you, listeners, for tuning in. You can share your feedback with us on Twitter at WhatThePerf. Share this episode with your friends and colleagues and ask them to subscribe, because whenever someone subscribes, somewhere far away, a perf engineer gets an early build to update his test scripts. See you in the next one.